everybody, it's Eric Pappenfuss. It's Friday, so it must be a buy day. And today, Olivia, we are going to talk about Walt Whitman and the Blurb. Have you ever wondered what the Blurb and Walt Whitman have in common?
Yeah.
Well, you're going to find out today, because Walt Whitman basically invented the concept of the book blurb. Although he didn't call it that, but let's get right to it. We had an amazing book come in the store just the other day, which was a copy of Leaves of Grass, one of my all-time favorite books of poetry. Now, Leaves of Grass is a very interesting book, Olivia, because it was published in many different editions over the course of Whitman's lifetime. This one here is the famous 1867 fourth edition. But what's interesting about Leaves of Grass, and what you might not know, is that when it started being published in the 1850s, Whitman had only 12 poems in it. And when it was published at the end of his life in what was called the deathbed edition, it had over 400 poems. So it's a book, the contents of which just changed over the course of the 19th century, the second half of the 19th century. And basically book collectors then thereby refer to the editions by their names. The first edition, the second edition, the fourth edition, the deathbed edition. This is the fourth edition, all right? Now, the first edition was privately printed. It had only 12 poems, and it created a huge scandal. Those who read it either loved it or hated it. And the person who loved it the most was Ralph Waldo Emerson. He thought it was great. And he famously wrote Whitman a letter that said, this is amazing, Walt. You've done an incredible job. You have answered the call of being like, this is true American poetry. Whitman, you know what Whitman did with that letter? He showed it to everybody he could possibly see, because he privately printed this small little thing. And he created, on his next edition, which I don't have here, but on the second edition, the blurb. Because on the spine of the book, on the spine of Leaves of Grass, he actually quoted Emerson's letter saying, I greet you at the beginning of a great career. He actually put that on the spine of his book. Pretty clever marketing, right? However, most reviewers were not as generous as Emerson. They thought it was profane, obscene. Some of the famous reviews included one by Rufus Griswold. Griswold was the famous reviewer who also was the bane of Edgar Allan Poe's existence, and after Poe's death really badmouthed Poe and his character, and that's why some people think ill of Poe today. It had to do with Griswold. He also hated it. He said this was obscene, filth, and basically accused him of being a closeted homosexual, which was quite an accusation at that time in the 1850s. Others said it should be burned, and still others said Whitman should go kill himself. Really, these were actually published reviews. It is a beautiful book of poetry, the first several editions, so much so that I think we ought to read a little bit in the spirit of banned books. I'm going to read you a poem which still seems a little controversial, maybe even today, but at the time, in the 1850s, you can imagine this created quite a stir. Okay, this is Whitman, his poem, To a Common Prostitute. My girl, I appoint with you an appointment, and I charge you that you make preparation to be worthy to meet me, and I charge you to be patient and perfect until I come. Walt Whitman, To a Common Prostitute. It is, the book Leaves of Grass, absolutely filled with wonderful poems like that. Note, it doesn't rhyme, it's free verse. It's distinctly American, and it's topics that really had never been covered in American poetry before. Whitman, quite famously, during the Civil War, loses his job, his government job, because of this poetry. Somebody tracks down. The first two editions of Leaves of Grass were sort of hard to find, privately published, small numbers. But those who could find it tracked it down, read it, and basically got him fired from his job. He worked as a nurse during the Civil War, attending to the sick and the suffering and the Union Army. His brother famously was in the Union Army. Anyway, it changed his view on life. And Whitman decided that in order to become a respectable poet, he would have to publish something a little bit more palatable to the public. And he wrote his most famous, most anthologized poem, Oh Captain, My Captain. And what's nice about the fourth edition of Leaves of Grass, that it actually reproduces that poem. Have you seen Dead Poets Society? The movie, the Robin Williams movie. Well, in that movie, they all rather, proudly proclaim this as an ode to their teacher, and they're trying to, stand up for Robin Williams' character. if you don't know, "Oh, Captain, my Captain," let me just read you a little bit. "My captain does not answer. His lips are pale and still. My father does not feel my arm. He has no pulse nor will. But the ship is anchored safe, its voyage closed and done. From fearful trip, the victor ship comes in with object won. Exalt, O shores, and ring, O bells, but I with silent tread walk the spot my captain lies, fallen, cold, and dead." Note a different style. Note that it rhymes suddenly. This is obviously an ode to the ship of state and to Abraham Lincoln. But this is the first edition of Leaves of Grass to include that poem. Now, amusingly for Whitman, this poem becomes so popular, but it still doesn't make the reviewers suggest that anyone should buy Leaves of Grass. And quite famously, and I've discussed this on another buy day, there's a later edition of Leaves of Grass that gets banned in Boston. And Osgood, who is Mark Twain's publisher, can't publish it, can't touch it, because it still contains poems that are considered profane at that time. And a lot of people begin to wonder, how could the same poet have written "O Captain, my Captain," and have written the blank verse and the free verse, which is elsewhere in, like, "I Sing the Body Electric" and all that. Well, anyway, that's the story of Leaves of Grass. That's also the story of the first book blurb. But Whitman did not call it a blurb. He hadn't invented that term. Do you know who invented the term blurb, Olivia?
No.
Well, it was another poet whose work came into the bookstore just this past week. And that poet was a name by the name of Gillette Burgess. And I'm going to show you his first novel. This is Gillette Burgess's first book. And what I like about this book is that it is inscribed by him and it has a little nonsense drawing. Now, Burgess was known as a sort of nonsense poet. He wrote a poem, and this is what ties Whitman and Burgess together, right at the end of the 19th century, which surpassed "O Captain, my Captain" as the most popular poem in American history up to that point, and the most anthologized poem up to that point. And it was called "The Purple Cow." Are you familiar with The Purple Cow? "I never saw a purple cow. I never hoped to see one. But I can tell you anyhow, I'd rather see than be one." The Purple Cow. A little bit different, wouldn't you say, than "O Captain, my Captain," but nonetheless beats "O Captain, my Captain" in the charts and propels Burgess into great fame. Incidentally, another trivia question. There was a third poem which also rivals those two for the most anthologized poem in 20th century American poetry. And it is a poem that we have also done a buy day on in the past. You want to guess what the third most popular poem was in 20th century America? It was "The Night Before Christmas." So there you go. "Night Before Christmas," "Purple Cow," "O Captain, my Captain." All right. Burgess is famous because he gets fired as a professor in Berkeley because he topples water fountains, which had been put up around San Francisco to encourage temperance. Doesn't like that. You can imagine he doesn't like it. By the way, did you see this inscription? It says "not from," not from Gillette Burgess, but might have been had he known him earlier in the game, which I think is a pretty cool inscription. All right. He came up with another book, another nonsense book called "Are You a Bromide?" And it talks about bromides versus sulfides. And a bromide is a conventional thinker. Do you think you are a conventional thinker, or do you think you are an outside-the-box thinker? If you're a conventional thinker, you are, unfortunately, a bromide. If you're an outside-the-box thinker, you are a sulfide. And this book is dedicated to this. And on the back of the book, on the back of the original dust jacket, he put Miss Belinda Blurb in the act of blurbing. We don't have that dust jacket because that dust jacket alone is worth thousands and thousands of dollars, but we do have a copy of the book. It is a later printing, so it doesn't have Belinda Blurb. It has already been blurbed, and she basically says, you're going to like this book so much that you're going to want to give it to your dentist. So that's a pretty good blurb. The first blurb ever recommending the book to your mother-in-law or dentist. Your choice. I would say we were both bromides, Olivia, but you're going to have to read the book to determine if you are. All right. We're going to end with a funny book. And as a funny book, I thought I'd go through all the books in the store to try and figure out what my favorite dust jacket blurb was. And there's some good dust jacket blurbs in the bookstore. John Cleese writes a great blurb. You want to get him on your dust jacket. Stephen King writes a great blurb. John Cleese writes a funny blurb. If you're a horror writer and you can get Stephen King to blurb your book, yeah, that's a good one. I like this one because this is one of our famous authors, Gertrude Stein, and this is a famous blurb, and we're going to call it our funny book of the day. Gertrude Stein, quite famously, was challenging for readers to read. And Bennett Cerf, who was the head of Random House, who was the publisher for Gertrude Stein, sort of embarked upon an amusing campaign of dust jacket blurbs for her books to an American audience, basically telling the American audience that you won't get it, and he really doesn't know why he's publishing it. Can you imagine that as a publishing? So here is my nomination for most amusing dust jacket blurb. This space is usually reserved for a brief description of a book's contents. In this case, however, I must admit frankly that I do not know what Miss Stein is talking about, and I do not even understand the title. I admire her. I'd like to publish her books, although most of the time I don't know what she's driving at, and that, Miss Stein tells me, is because I am dumb. But you will not be dumb, nor will you be a bromide, if you buy Gertrude Stein's book, in this case, The Geographical History of America, or the relation of human nature to the human mind. Our funny book of the week, also available in our famous author section at the Midtown Scholar. Well, thanks for watching. I hope you enjoyed today's Buy Day. I hope you'll watch next Friday and every Friday at noon for more adventures in the world of books.